address?
Michelle Stonemark, 40 North Macaulay. I have a couple of questions regarding this document that I got tonight, that we all got tonight. Specifically the page in the back, these pages that are questions and answers. In regard to the buried drums, I read a report at the DEP's office, dated, and I want to say it was May 2009, that said it was a closure report issued from the DEP on the site, and it had said they did suspect there were 15 or so drums that they couldn't find on the site. Are you saying that if those drums were buried back in the 80s that you suspect that they'd be completely gone by now?
If the drums were put into the mine shaft, they're gone.
I don't think that it was the mine shaft. I think it said something to the effect of, and I have a report on my computer, but it said something to the effect of being dug to a certain distance deep, to a certain depth, then buried, then covered and covered and covered and covered. So in that case, would you say the same, that you think those would still be disintegrated by now?
The drums would probably be, they'd have a lot of rust holes in them at this point.
So could be leaking?
Yeah, the contents probably have, the drums are probably leaked at this point. There's probably nothing left in the drums. Depending on the constituent, depending on what was in those drums, they may have degraded, the constituent may have degraded, but probably not based on the other analytical data that we have here. Some of these constituents are pretty long-lived. The issue you have when you have drum disposal is you impact tend to impact two different things. You impact soil because the drums, they're encased in soil. That leaks out, so you end up with soil getting impacted. If there's enough of it, you'll have it migrate down into groundwater. My guess is if those drums exist, it probably has migrated down into groundwater at this point, but there's been a lot of analytical data that's been collected between the work that we've done and the work that ABB has done. And at this point, we have a pretty decent handle. There still are definitely questions, but generally we look at the data and are pretty comfortable. We understand what groundwater is doing at this point. So, bottom line, absolutely, there still may be impacted drums. Let's take the worst case. Cecil purchases the property. They're planning to put a foundation through a drum disposal area. The soil that they encounter that's impacted has to get managed. So you've got to dig that stuff up. The soil that you need to remove to put in your foundation, whatever it might be, you have to dig that up and then properly dispose of that material. You can actually leave pretty high concentrations of contaminated soil in place, though. You don't have to remove all the impacts. Your DEP, EPA, and virtually every other state that we work in allows you to leave fairly high concentrations of impacted soil in place. It's whether humans can be exposed to it becomes the issue.
Right. One of the things that I read in this paperwork that I got from the township regarding the sale of the property was that since the township is proposing disturbance on the former main plant area, shallow soil with an access road, and possibly slab-on grade foundations for the proposed development, superficial soil sampling may be required for evaluation with a direct contact MSCs to eliminate dermal exposure to the construction workers.
What does that mean?
What does it mean?
Yeah, is that your question? What is all that?
No, that's not my question. Is it says to me that because of where we want to do it, we're saying that we're going to have to do testing to make sure that the skin of the construction workers doesn't get injured in the process, to protect the construction workers, to eliminate dermal exposure to construction workers.
That's actually a pretty standard practice. There are just under 3,000 sites that are on a Pennsylvania DEP registry for what's called environmental covenants. And an EC is a prohibition on excavation of soil, utilization of groundwater. There's some engineering control that's in place. You'd be amazed. I guarantee you have been on sites. You've either been shopping or one of an office building that has an EC that has a prohibition exactly like that. What you end up having to do is you've got to put your workers into, they have to wear specific respiratory protection if they're really high concentrations, or you have to make sure that they can't touch the impacted material by wearing gloves. But that's actually a pretty standard practice. I mean, there's a lot of sites that we've had to have those types of controls where people are, where you have to protect them. That's standard.
Well, to my next point, you talked about why would a property that is contaminated have a deed restriction and be only used for commercial or industrial usage? You talked about places like the Southside Works, residential and commercial properties, Pittsburgh Technology Center, Bakery Square, residential developments in Mount Lebanon, numerous shopping malls throughout western Pennsylvania. I'd like to know what the distance to schools, specifically highly populated schools, that those areas are.
Bakery Square, 200 feet.
From
a school.
But Bakery Square also was approved for residential development, and this was not.
Bakery Square, the portion that we're talking about, actually, Bakery Square is only commercial usage. It doesn't have residential usage.
What's that right here?
Bakery Square has multiple pieces. Part of it has residential, part of it has commercial. The piece that has commercial is about 200 feet away from Ellis School. They actually swapped part of Ellis.
Ellis School?
Yeah.
What's Ellis School?
Ellis School is a private school. It's a very expensive private school.
It's a private school.
It's a very expensive private school.
Okay, let's see. Not residential. Okay, so you talk about all these groundwater testing that was done, but all the groundwater testing that I pulled from the DEP, there was nothing for 2017 or 2018.
That's
so did
because,
they
that's because our data hasn't been submitted to the DEP, simply because
for 2017?
Yeah, we're not obligated to submit it to the DEP. Our data doesn't have to be. It's very typical. What ends up happening, you do these pretty detailed reports, and they're called, the DEP has a specific name for it, a remedial investigation report.
Mm-hmm.
You do these RIRs, and we have sites where we'll spend 3-4 years doing nothing but collecting data, but never forward that data to the department. And that's most consultants, that's pretty typical, simply because the program that we work under is 30 years old. Act 2 has been around since 1995. Everybody pretty much understands at this point how that program works. And the department, frankly, doesn't care about partial data. They're more interested in what's your complete site characterization, what's the extent of the contamination. So until you think you have that nailed, most people tend not to submit their data in partials to the department.
If I can, again, just to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask questions. Yep.
Thank you.
My name is John Scarman. I live at 4,500 Berry Court. You mentioned that there were 16 constituents, are they called? Chemicals, potential contaminants, in the one bullet up there. How do you guys determine what 16 to test for at a site like this, and how many constituents possible does that cover?
Actually, there were 16 constituents detected. EPA has developed these short, they call them, it's generically, it's a short list. It's what we analyze for what's called target compound list, volatiles. It's a suite of about, I think it's 32 volatiles, very common chemicals that are used. That's the same list that's used on a Superfund site when you go in to do an initial screening. You're looking for these chemicals. I mean, there's exotic things like Phanfer and a bunch of weird stuff that we would never expect to see at a site like this. But we use a standard list that is record metals. It's a suite. Actually, I think we did probably list metals here. There are 13 metals. It's an EPA list that's developed and it's utilized for screening purposes for sites like this where you're trying to determine what might be at the property. So it should have said 16 constituents were detected versus 16 analytes.
No, maybe I misread.
No, it was.
You're right. I think there are only 14 listed on that bullet too. Were the other two like a derivative of what you already listed up there? Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's a couple statements towards the end of this packet that they handed out on the way in, to the effect of the site can be cost effectively remediated and that you don't expect any surprises. What's the basis for those statements?
There's one, before we get to the point where we can conclusively say, here's what the path forward costs are, there's a couple of issues that still exist on the property. One is there's a constituent known as 1,4-dioxane, not dioxin. It's a different constituent, and it's used as a stabilizer in solvents. That's present in the little tributaries down towards the bottom end of the property. We've looked at it, and there's a risk assessment person that we work with, and then there's a couple of other folks internally in my office that have a lot of experience dealing with these constituents. Our gut feel is looking at the concentrations. When we run a risk assessment, that the concentrations in that tributary are going to come out and it's going to be okay. Where the downside is, if I'm wrong, or the risk assessment, our sort of gut feel, because we've looked at it, if we're wrong, that gets really, really expensive to have to treat that stream. So before you have 100% of where you know what your path forward costs are, there's got to be a risk assessment, there's got to be a bunch of modeling, and then the DEP has to weigh in on that risk assessment document as well.
What percentage are you at right now?
I'm probably, again, I'm probably 75% comfy that this site is addressable, with fairly straightforward. But I mean, I could be wrong. Any consultant that tells you they're right 100% of the time, either hasn't been doing this very long.
But just for a little bit of clarification too, like there's been no discussion with the DEP about what we would have to do to address the 1,4-dioxane in the tributary, correct? I mean, you've had discussions, there's been no formal decision by the DEP.
If somebody told us to start ASAP, go to work, figure out if those tributaries are okay, we're 6 to 9 months out before that could possibly happen. I'm just going to correct one thing that you said. If the department doesn't approve of the risk assessment, that's an absolute, on that little tributary, that's a walk-away point for Cecil. And the reason I say that, Cindy, is it's extremely difficult to treat 1,4-dioxane. It's really tough to pull out. So if there are human health impacts or ecological impacts, the DEP looks at critters as well as humans. So if the critters in the stream are a problem, because we've exceeded on that risk assessment, that's a walk-away point. You can't afford to fix that.
And we're 6 to 9 months from that decision being reached, or?
No, that's assuming if somebody cuts loose today to do that. I think that's a decision these commissioners need to make is, do you even want to move forward? Because you're going to spend 9 months, $100,000 to get to the point of having DEP tell you whether that risk assessment's acceptable or not.
Well, didn't ABB say that stream couldn't be cleaned?
Oh yeah, if the 1,4-dioxane exceeds the risk criteria, you could fix it, but you're going to be spending 8 figures to do it. I mean, it's a walk-away point if that's.
You mentioned in one of our meetings the DEP could make us pipe that whole stream.
That's one of the ways to prevent exposure. But again, the problem you have is if you have an exceedance of the 1,4-dioxane, you could pipe the creek. There's a whole host of problems with that because you still have groundwater that's going to migrate, and you're going to have to do long-term sampling. I mean, it's again, you exceed it, it's a walk away.
All right, so the testing you've done detected it in that stream, but you don't know what the extent is or the level?
Oh, we know the extent and the level.
Okay.
It's whether we have.
I'm sorry if these are silly questions.
No, not silly questions, not at all.